Clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. So I want to say to the millions of people who voted for us in 2019, many of them voting Conservative for the first time, thank you for that incredible mandate, the biggest Conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. And the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019. And of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And let me say now to the people of Ukraine that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And at the same time, in this country, we've been pushing forward a vast programme of investment in infrastructure and skills and technology, the biggest in a century, because if I have one insight into human beings, it is that genius and talent and enthusiasm and imagination are evenly distributed throughout the population, but opportunity is not. And that's why we must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom. And if we can do that in this country, we will be the most prosperous in Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much, and when we have such a vast mandate, and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward through tough times, not just helping families to get through it, but changing and improving the way we do things, cutting burdens on businesses and families, and yes, cutting taxes, because that is the way to generate the growth and the income we need to pay for great public services. And to that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. I want to thank Carrie and our children and all the members of my family who have had to put up with so much for so long. I want to thank the peerless British civil service for all the help and support that you have given our police, our emergency services, and of course our fantastic NHS, who at critical moment helped to extend my own period in office, as well as our armed services and our agencies that are so admired around the world, and our indefatigable Conservative Party members and supporters, whose selfless campaigning makes our democracy possible. I want to thank the wonderful staff here at Chequers, here at Number 10, and of course at Chequers, and our fantastic prop force detectives, the one group, by the way, who never leak. above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I've found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Applause from some outside town Downing Street, but as you heard, hecklers, well, there are his supporters. There were obviously those who were jeering and booing during that statement. There was the moment we were waiting for, the formal resignation from Boris Johnson as he steps down from his role. And if you're just joining us here on CBC News Network, just a couple of things that we heard from the Prime Minister. The will of his party members, his government is such that he has decided to step down with regret. It was very clear. He was mentioning that he's sad to be giving up what he called the best job in the world, but in his words, them's the breaks. He said he tried to get them to persuade his party members, lawmakers, that it would be eccentric to give up the government at this particular point, but was not successful in convincing them, and that was painful to him not to be able to see through the agenda. As he said, the herd instinct is powerful, and when it moves, it moves. He has learned no one is remotely indispensable in stepping away from the role. But he did say, very much as he thanked the British voter and acknowledged the huge majority that he won in 2019, that he had fought to continue his job, his duty, his obligation. And he was proud of his legacy in that nearly 3-year term. The resignation after scandal and after really a remarkable mutiny from within his own government, Boris Johnson resigning as the British Prime Minister. Scott Lucas back with us, American political science professor, politics professor at Birmingham University in England. He was with me prior to that announcement. He has been listening in to the announcement. As expected, the resignation overall, no contrition really for scandal, but what did you hear, Professor, from Boris Johnson just there?
Well, first of all, the significant practical detail is that Johnson did not say he is leaving immediately. He said until a new person is in place. So he may be trying to hang on until October, although I don't think that'll be possible. Now, in terms of my reaction to the rhetoric, and I want to try to still be an analyst here, there was not only no contrition, there was a continuation of the deceptions, the deceits, and just the almost sheer arrogance under which we've suffered in the last few years. And why do you say that? Because those are harsh words. Boris Johnson was touting himself in terms of this great success with getting Brexit done. Well, Brexit's not done, or at least it's been done in a sense where we're suffering the economic consequences, but leave that aside. When he said, we got the UK out of the pandemic faster than any other country, they did not. 181,000 people died in this country, one of the highest death tolls. And a lot of those deaths were unnecessary because of what Boris Johnson did. And the sheer priority of those around him, which were on making financial gains and on trying to deny the extent of what was happening. He said that he had had the biggest investment in infrastructure in a century in the UK. He did not. He promised 40 hospitals in 2019 in the general election. Those hospitals were never built. He promised tens of thousands of doctors and nurses. Those jobs have never appeared. And indeed, the nurses, the doctors, the police officers, the teachers have had to suffer without really having an improvement in their position in the last few years. I could go on, in other words, but it is part of a wider scenario with Boris Johnson, which is there is the reality, and then there is what is inside Boris Johnson's head. or at least what he tells us.
Right.
So and that closing statement where he said Britain will be golden again, he turned gold into lead in the past 2.5 years. He won't acknowledge it, but it's important that we do because we've got to recover from that.
Even if things seem dark now, our future is golden, is how he concluded that. So it's interesting, burnishing his own legacy, getting in front of the story, as it were, as we say, before many pieces to come in the columns tomorrow or today through the day. Look at that legacy and assess it perhaps differently from his version. He certainly did lay out his accomplishments as he sees them. Coming back to what you said, the timeline, clear, he's acknowledged the will of those within his party, so he'll step away as party leader. But you're quite right, Professor Lucas, no indication that he's going as prime minister soon. He said that, just so people understand, the 1922 committee, those are backbenchers who are very powerful and who determine the timetable, all of these things. He said they will announce the timetable next week, and the process of choosing a new leader begins now. So no indication of stepping away immediately. Many are now calling for him to do so, critics and those within the party. Why would he even want to stay on through until the fall at this point, having lost so much support?
Because this is the one truthful thing he said. He thinks it's the best job in the world. This is what he had always aspired to do for decades. And he made it to the top. And he doesn't want to give it up, and he doesn't want to be pulled down the hill by himself, by his own hubris and humiliation. So even in the next few weeks, he's going to try to cling on to try to claim some credit. But there was a real notable sign outside 10 Downing Street. I don't know if your cameras picked it up.
Well, why don't you pause on that? Because we actually do have live shots. There's a chopper flying over Whitehall right now. And you did hear a smattering of applause, but these are people who you could hear, as I said, jeering or heckling, responding, and you can see they turned out for this moment. Why is that?
Well, I mean, Boris Johnson's a very divisive figure, and, not just because of his policies, but because of, as I said, his larger-than-life ego. But I think don't focus on the boos, focus on the cheers. There were only about 30 conservative MPs, and they would have been messaged by 10 Downing Street to come out and support Boris on this departure speech. Now, for context, there are about 360 conservative MPs in the House of Parliament, and only 30 of them turned out for the speech. There was only one, as it were, heavyweight that I saw there, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's been a Johnson loyalist for years. Now, if that's the maximum support that Johnson can get as he is departing, the idea that he is going to hang on for the next few weeks with support from across the party, again, he will now be in the realm of fantasy. In other words, the emperor not only has no clothes, he really has not much dignity or position left after today.
Is there any argument to be made for his staying on, given, you talked about when we spoke last hour, the economic challenges, the war in Ukraine ongoing. Can certainly listen to people who are saying, no, he must go now. It's an untenable situation. But what about on the other side? Any point?
Yeah. I mean, there's an argument for that when you go into the transition period, you don't depart immediately. And that was what happened with Theresa May in 2019. I mean, she announced she was stepping down, but she gave a timeline to say, all right, I'll stay in post until there's a replacement. But Theresa May was a person who, even if you disagreed with her policies, was a person who was widely respected in Westminster, was a person who was very pragmatic, and was a person who had not indulged in this me above thee type of politics. The fact is that Boris Johnson has stoked so much animosity from within the party. It's been building up for months, but especially in the last couple of weeks, that, the idea that they still want him in place, I think the only reason why Johnson stays there is if there's a very, very quick process from the 1922 committee, who have to organize the leadership election, where you can get this completed, in effect, suspending the summer recess. You get this done within the next month. Perhaps he's allowed to stay on for that. But I think even some voices are saying right now they want him out by Monday with a caretaker, someone who is not going to try to be the next prime minister. So a caretaker like Dominic Raab, perhaps holding the office where Johnson is sent back packing out of 10 Downing Street into whatever, delusion he wants to try to promote in terms of his success.
We've certainly heard that from Labour, from Keir Starmer, leader there. We've heard that from Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister in Scotland. They want it to come to an end now. I'm wondering, again, coming back, just let's show people the live shots as we watch this. It looks from on high to be very peaceful, but you see a long line of Metropolitan Police, a lot of bobbies there, and I would say several hundred people at the end of Downing Street wanting to be there for that moment of Boris Johnson's resignation. As you said, we did see the group applauding, but it was a very small group and they dispersed very quickly. I'm wondering, this incredible mutiny abandoned by, 59 resignations and 1 firing of Michael Gove so far when he confronted Boris Johnson and urged him to resign. Is it just this last scandal, Professor Lucas, or has this been a moment that's perhaps sort of blown open, dissension, rebellion within? Because there have been many Boris Johnson scandals over the nearly 3 years past, just this latest, but it's really led to this now. So what I'm wondering is, it's just really exposing what's been going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, I was smiling a bit because I was thinking of a scene from one of my favorite films. Maybe I shouldn't admit this, Animal House, where you've got the fraternity brothers who are on double secret probation after yet another scandal that they've caused. Well, what happened with last month's no confidence vote, which Johnson barely survived, is he was on double secret probation. People were fed up. They were fed up with the exposures over Partygate and the flouting of coronavirus regulations. They were fed up with the numerous revelations about his personal life. They were fed up with the revelations of ethical problems within the party. And what happened here is you just need that tipping point. And that tipping point is, any other politician, when they heard of a conservative MP, a man named Chris Pincher, who was accused of multiple sexual abuse cases, when they heard of that, they would have stepped up and taken responsibility and said, look, we really need to investigate why he became Foreign Office Minister in 2019 on my watch. Johnson lied and said, I didn't know anything about the case. And when that lie was exposed, then double secret probation means expulsion. It is sort of as simple as that, but it also points up to something more widely that I want to emphasize for your viewers. There'll be a lot of people like myself who'll be really going after Johnson today, but there's a wider issue here, and that is the Conservative Party, even when they had doubts about Johnson, even when they knew about his weaknesses, they enabled him. They enabled him for years. He became prime minister, knifing Theresa May in the back because there were enough conservatives who thought he could, quote, get Brexit done for their own narrow self-interest. And when he could not get Brexit done in a way which served that self-interest, because we are heading into the economic difficulties, then the support began to erode. And that's when the scandals started to have an effect. Once the luster had come off of that 2019 moment where he got that majority in Parliament, then he was going to be vulnerable, even if he didn't know it until the last 24 hours.
You mentioned Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, an ongoing loyalist. So many have left as supporters, but she's still there. Liz Truss, coming back from Bali, she's there for the G20 foreign ministers meeting. She's just said the Prime Minister made the right decision. We need calmness and unity now, and to keep governing while a new leader is found. Her name, one of those already being bandied about as someone who might be in this upcoming leadership race. Professor Lucas, one more question. You mentioned that majority, and he has called it a colossal majority and hearkened in his remarks back to that win in 2019, the most support, the most seats since the Thatcher days. But we've been listening to clips from people in London who said they supported him initially, but even they had lost, they're tired of Boris Johnson, and they believe it's time for him to go. Where does this leave the voters in the UK? What do you think their mood is right now, and what would we expect to see?
There's a group in this country where I've lived for so long, for 40 years, who are sort of entrenched in their positions, which is, yay Brexit, boo Brexit, a lot of them boo immigrants, which is another thing that Johnson and his folks played upon. But most people I know, they just want some competence, and they just want some relief from being battered. This is still a country which has a lot that is very, very good about it. But the fact is that, and this is why Johnson's Golden England delusion was so damaging, is that the economic and political fabric of this country was being eroded. It was being eroded in terms of services. It was being eroded in terms of the ability to get through a crisis like coronavirus. And then finally, we saw it being eroded in terms of politicians, because we know politicians are out for themselves, fine, but they wouldn't tell us the truth. And they were blatant about not telling us the truth. And I wouldn't want to say if the next year's election will go Conservative, Labour, or if the Scottish National Party will move towards independence in Scotland. I don't want to make that kind of projection. But I think voters will want politicians who finally level with them and say, this is where we are. In other words, those days of delusion between 2016 and 2019, the Brexit delusion, I think those may finally be over in this country.
Professor Scott Lucas, thank you. 2 conversations today, and I've enjoyed every minute of both. Thank you very much for bringing your insight to us this morning at this moment of resignation for British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Again, The View from on high, hundreds of people there to protest Boris Johnson, to listen to that moment, to heckle him from just outside 10 Downing Street. And again, in terms of reaction, you heard in the resignation speech, one of the things of which he was proud was being a leader for Western allies in terms of supporting Ukraine in its war with Russia. Just coming in reaction from Ukrainian presidential advisor on Twitter, thanking Boris Johnson, and here's the quote, for always being at the forefront of supporting Ukraine. He referenced the ongoing British support, even though he is leaving the post. The best job in the world, he said, leaving with regret, but unable to convince his government that he should stay on after so many scandals. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson resigning this morning.